22. Man with Four Gloves. On the freezing afternoon of February 5th, 1944, Harry Gold walked the streets of New York City's Lower East Side. He was wearing gloves and holding a second pair in his hand. This was according to Semyonov's directions. The gloves were a recognition signal for the man he was to meet. The other man, Gold, was told would be carrying a tennis ball. A few minutes before 4, Gold turned onto Henry Street. He would always try to get to a meeting spot a little early just to have a look. He liked what he saw. The narrow street was lined with 4 and 5-story brick tenement buildings, many of them in the process of being torn down and replaced. The place had been very well chosen, said Gold. It was beautifully deserted. A few blocks away, Klaus Fuchs climbed the concrete stairs of a Manhattan subway station and stepped up onto the streets of the Lower East Side. He pulled out a folded map, took a quick look, and started walking. As soon as he turned onto Henry Street, he took a tennis ball from the pocket of his long coat. This was according to Ruth Werner's instructions before leaving Britain. She had told him where and when to meet his American contact. She told him to carry a tennis ball and to look for a man holding an extra pair of gloves. Fuchs did not know the man's real name and was not to ask. Sure enough, as Fuchs approached the designated spot, there was a man with 4 gloves pacing the sidewalk to keep warm. The man glanced at Fuchs and at the ball in his hand. He stepped forward. "What is the way to Chinatown?" asked Gold. "I think Chinatown closes at 5 o'clock," Fuchs responded. With this exchange of passwords, each knew for certain he was dealing with the right man. Gold introduced himself as Raymond. Fuchs used his real name since there was no secret about his identity. They shook hands and began walking together. "We strolled a while and talked," Gold later reported to Semyonov. "He is about 5'10", thin, pale complexioned, and at first was very reserved in manner. Gold suggested they get something to eat. Fuchs agreed. "As I kept talking about myself," reported Gold, "he warmed up and began to show evidence of getting down to business." Fuchs told Gold he was to be helping the Soviet Union. He told Gold where he was living, where the British team was working, and who was on it. He described as much as he knew about the organization of the Manhattan Project, saying he'd heard that the bomb design was happening at a secret site somewhere in New Mexico. They had made arrangements to meet again and agreed to a few basic rules. To avoid drawing attention, they would never meet in the same place twice, and under no circumstances, said Gold, were we to wait any longer than 4 or 5 minutes at any of the meeting places. About a month later, they met again on a Manhattan street corner and walked together toward the East River. Gold asked Fuchs for specifics about his work in America. Fuchs explained that he and the British team were working out the details of how to best separate the U-235 from U-238. The actual work was being done at a factory in the southeast, the Oak Ridge plant, though Fuchs didn't know that detail yet. Fuchs described some of the complex challenges of separating uranium atoms. With his experience in chemistry, Gold was able to follow the basic science. "At the first opportunity," said Gold, "I put this material in writing and later handed it over to John." John was a KGB agent named Anatoly Yakovs. Gold's longtime contact, Semyon Semyonov, had been under extremely close FBI surveillance lately, making it too risky for him to be closely involved with a source as valuable as Fuchs. Gold's new contact, Yakovs, worked as a clerk at the Soviet consulate in New York. Soon after receiving Gold's report, Yakovs slipped away from his desk, walked up to the KGB office on the top floor, coded the report, and sent it to Moscow. Top officials at KGB headquarters were thrilled. Finally, they had a high-level physicist inside the Manhattan Project. Just as he'd been in Britain, Fuchs was a bit of a loner in New York. He bought a violin and spent his evenings playing music in his apartment. On weekends, he enjoyed hiking on trails outside the city. Each weekday, he went to his office near Wall Street, where he worked with a team of British physicists. The other scientists, like Fuchs, respected his work, but didn't pay much attention to him. No one noticed him slipping notes and handwritten drafts of technical papers, documents he would have no reason to take home, into his briefcase. "I personally furnished all of the drafts," he later said, "directly to the individual known to me as Raymond." Fuchs and Gold set a third meeting for March on Park Avenue in Manhattan. It was a chilly day, and both wore overcoats. Fuchs and Gold spotted each other and knew what to do. We immediately turned into one of the dark, deserted side streets, Gold recalled. Gold walked up behind Fuchs. Fuchs took the envelope from his open overcoat pocket and passed it quickly to Gold, who dropped it inside his coat. They walked together to the next corner, then separated. The whole affair took possibly 30 seconds or 1 minute, Gold said. That was standard tradecraft. When documents were to be exchanged, the meeting should be very short. Approximately 15 minutes later, said Gold, I turned over the information to John. Fuchs and Gold met again in late March in the Bronx. While they had dinner, Fuchs told Gold that the atomic bomb was being designed at a place called Los Alamos. At several more meetings in May and June, Fuchs delivered packages of documents with the technical information on his work. Gold took the packages directly to Anatoly Yakovlev's. After one of his pickups from Fuchs, Gold arrived early for the handoff to Yakov's. I still had about 5 minutes, he said. He felt the large envelope in his pocket. Inside was information about the most closely guarded secret on Earth. The temptation was too great. Gold stopped on the street in front of a drugstore. He looked all around. No one was watching. He slipped the envelope from his jacket pocket, reached in, pulled out the papers, and tilted them toward the faint light coming through the store window. He began to read. This was in very small but distinct writing, he said. It was in ink and consisted mainly of mathematical derivations. Gold didn't understand a word of it. In late July, Gold arrived at the Bell Cinema in Brooklyn for a meeting with Fuchs. Fuchs never showed. Their break-up meeting was scheduled for a couple weeks later on the corner of 96th Street and Central Park West in Manhattan. Again, Gold waited. Again, no Fuchs. On the second occasion, I became very worried, said Gold. The area is very close to the section of New York where muggings often occur. Yakov told Gold to try to find out if Fuchs was still in New York. Gold wrote Fuchs' name and address in a book and took it to the scientist building. He was led in by a woman who was cleaning the lobby. Gold showed her the book, explaining he borrowed it from his friend, Klaus Fuchs, where he was here to return it. Fuchs was gone, the woman said. He'd left town suddenly and didn't say where he was going. Gold passed the bad news to Yakovs. KGB officials in Moscow were furious. After years of frustration, they'd finally gotten a source inside the American bomb project, and now they'd lost him. A stern warning and reprimand must be made, Moscow cabled its New York office, for losing contact with such a source. The Soviets never could have guessed that a second source was about to walk in the door.